Breaking into Susan's report to give you breaking news from New York City, where two planes, have hit both towers of the World Trade Center in Lower Manhattan, the upper floors of the World Trade Center, 110 stories high, each tower. Television networks were showing pictures of the first crash, which occurred shortly before 9 o'clock this morning, so that everyone watching that picture saw a second plane hit the second tower moments after, maybe 5 or 10 minutes past 9 o'clock Eastern Time this morning. Kerry Nolan, a reporter for WNYC, our member station in New York City, is with me now. Kerry?
Good morning, Bob.
Are you, where are you exactly?
Actually, I can't even get into New York City at this point. I'm in Atlantic Highlands, New Jersey, which is a shore town, and from my front door, I can see the World Trade Centers, and I can see the black smoke billowing from both towers. I was watching CNN like many other people when this story first broke. Right now, what we know is what you said. Obviously, there are going to be enormous injuries and deaths, no doubt, but we're not getting any kind of reports anywhere. What we have now is that the Associated Press is saying that the FBI is investigating reports of a possible hijacking. If that's not the case, then the other scenario that's being sort of discussed is that the radar systems at one of the three airports in the area has gone horribly awry.
Well, at the site of the first crash, of course, the thought accident occurred immediately, but the visibility, at least judging from the television pictures, looks pretty good today.
It's a beautiful day. There's not a cloud in the sky. That's one reason that as soon as everyone saw that second plane crash, foul play is now at the top of the list.
That was about 9 o'clock this morning Eastern Time, so there very likely would have been people in the building.
No doubt, it's a regular work day. The Labor Day weekend long over, and we're absolutely certain that there are people at about the 85th floor and up, which is where we're estimating the first plane crashed. It's going to be a very long and sad day for a lot of people in New York.
And possibly more people on the planes, because the FBI is investigating reports of possible hijacking.
Exactly. The first plane was reported to have been a two-engine commercial plane. We can assume people on that, aside from the crew, certainly on that plane. The second one looks to be another commercial jet that just smashed right through the entire building. Right now it's incomprehensible to think what the end result of all of this is going to be.
And not much of the debris came to the ground. A lot of it's still in the World Trade Center.
I'm certain of that. Some reports said that very little had come to the ground, certainly in the first crash. In the second crash, from what I saw from the news footage that I was looking at, quite a bit did rain down. It's a very busy area. The World Trade Center is right near Wall Street. It could not have come at a worse time in the day, certainly, when the streets are just filled with people going to work.
Both towers are on fire. Smoke is billowing out of them. You can see flames. There will likely be secondary explosions. Is there anything that the fire department can do about a fire that high up? They're up 80, 90 stories.
My gut feeling is no. There are no cherry pickers that can get that high. Probably the best that can be done is something, some sort of helicopter measures, much the way they're doing with the fires in the wildfires in the Midwest. But beyond that, there's very little that can be done. I can only imagine how hideous it must be inside that building for the people trying to get out.
I understand we have a witness who's in a restaurant, a Mr. Frederick Fufu. Sir, are you there?
Yes, I am.
And you are where right now?
I am on the 31st floor of the J.P. Morgan, ex-J.P. Morgan penthouse building. I'm like maybe 2 blocks away from the World Trade facing the the World Trade right now.
And can you describe the scene there for us?
I don't think you can really imagine and describe this scene. It's just unreal. We were all in the kitchen cooking, and we heard a big explosion, which almost sounded like two explosions actually. And we saw this big hole, the flames. We saw papers flying everywhere. Maybe at least 10 stories of windows gone. We saw people falling off the building, at least a dozen, I would say 10. And then 10 minutes later, we saw another boom, I don't know, like some kind of sound, and then a big, huge hole on the other side of the other World Trade Center, which is even bigger from this view here.
So you watched the second explosion?
We watched actually the second explosion. We couldn't really tell. It was so fast, like the corner of our eyes, we saw a plane, something just like flying right into the building.
And you're how close to the building?
I'd say 2 blocks. I mean, 2 blocks diagonally, if you imagine.
Have police tried to get people out of the area?
They just called us now to evacuate slowly the building. They're going to have to lock it for security reasons. So I'm going to have to leave soon. But you can't imagine, and you can imagine that somebody would even try to think of doing something like this. It's just not right.
And you say you saw people coming out of the building?
No, I saw people falling off the building, like probably from high up of the fire, or falling off the building, maybe, I don't know. But we saw people like really like jump. I mean, like they were gonna jumping in a parachute.
The second plane, the one you saw crash into the second tower of the building. Can you describe the plane?
No, really not. It was like we heard a boom, like it just like maybe 20 feet away from the tower. I heard a sound, turned around, and then heard another sound, and it was like this huge explosion. But it was definitely a plane coming into the building. So
you can't tell if it was a small private aircraft or whether it was a commercial airliner?
We said it was probably bigger. Like, it was not like a little one-seater, definitely. It was like definitely something much bigger than that.
So you're...
yeah, I must say it's the whole top of both buildings from 80 story up. It's just clouds and flames and holes the size of maybe 10, 12 story high holes into the frame of the building.
Sir, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
NPR's Jackie Leiden is in New York. Jackie?
Bob, I'm afraid my report may be less informative than the previous caller, who's much closer than I am. I think what's shocking is that a Brooklynite like myself, I can look across the river. I happen to see the World Trade Towers from my rear window, and even from here, a distance of several miles, clouds of smoke are rising many hundreds of feet into the sky. I think I might remind people that this is primary election day here in New York, so people were so unprepared for this, of course, and police would have been called to polling places and sort of on.
From NPR News in Washington, I'm Jean Cochran. 2 planes crashed into the twin towers of the World Trade Center in New York this morning, about 20 to 30 minutes apart. Black smoke has been pouring out of huge holes in the upper portions of the building. There's been no immediate word on injuries or fatalities. NPR's Larry Abramson has been following the story.
The first plane crashed into the North Tower of the Trade Center at around 8:50 this morning. Witnesses said this first plane looked like a commercial jetliner. Shortly afterward, another plane hit the other tower, causing another massive explosion. That was apparently a smaller plane. Debris from the explosions rained down onto neighboring streets just as many people were heading to work. There's no word on whether the crashes might have been some sort of act of terrorism, but the FBI is investigating that possibility. Ordinarily, air traffic is routed well away from the towers. At 110 stories, the buildings are 2 of the tallest in the world and are located in the center of New York's financial district. In 1993, 6 people were killed when one of the buildings was hit by a bomb as part of a terrorist attack. Larry Abramson, NPR News.
And President Bush has been speaking. He says the United States will hunt down those who committed the attacks on the World Trade Center this morning. Iraq says it has shot down a U.S. spy plane. It would be the second loss of an unmanned U.S. reconnaissance plane in less than a month. A U.S. military spokesman in the Persian Gulf says a spy plane is missing and its loss is being investigated. The Palestinians say the high-level truce talks with Israel scheduled for today are off. The two sides have been unable to agree on a meeting site, and the announcement comes after Israeli tanks surrounded the West Bank town of Jenin early today. The tank movement triggered a firefight with local gunmen that left 7 Palestinians injured. Israel claims Palestinian militants have been staging attacks from Jenin, including last weekend's suicide bombing. The Postal Service plans to raise the price of first-class stamps to 37 cents. That's an increase of 3 cents. The last increase came in January, and many other rates rose again this summer. But the post office still faces a deficit of $1.6 billion this year. Postal Board Chairman Robert Ryder says the agency had to act now because it takes nearly a year to raise rates. Elizabeth Dole has a news conference set for later today, and it's widely expected she'll announce she's running for the Senate seat from North Carolina, which is being vacated by retiring Jesse Helms. Republican leaders are hoping Dole's name recognition and cabinet experience will help her win the seat. A panel from the National Academy of Sciences is warning that new embryonic stem cell lines will be needed in the future. That panel is issuing a report today which calls for continued federal funding for the research. This is NPR News.
Discussing today's plane crashes into the World Trade Center in Lower Manhattan in New York City. Each of the 2 towers of the World Trade Center, 110 stories each, was struck by an airplane.
2 airplanes, Bob, from what we were able to tell. One smaller plane, perhaps a single-engine plane, and one a larger plane, much larger, carrying passengers. I don't know if we're talking about a 737 or a larger plane than that, and 3 explosions. And most of our information is coming just this way so far, some pictures and the telephone.
The plane struck the upper floors, and the fire continues. These towers look like 2 smoke flares. There's billowing black smoke out of each of them. And Jackie is seeing them from Brooklyn.
Yeah, I'm seeing them from a distance of about 3 miles away. Big plumes of smoke, hundreds of feet high, very prominent on the skyline. I'm sure anyone who's anywhere in the New York area today, at least in the, Brooklyn is opposite to the southern tip of Manhattan, so we have a particularly good view. In fact, if listeners weren't at the top, I am parallel in my own view with the World Trade Towers. I always like to point them out to guests in my loft, and today I can't see them at all because all I can see is this towering gray column of smoke.
The president, in his remarks today, termed this a terrorist attack, and he said that the U.S. promises to track down whoever is responsible for these crashes. He says terrorism against our country will not stand.
Well, I think that that will be the first response. It seems so, this is not how could this possibly be an accident? It defies the imagination. I think that, we have been worried about this sort of thing. Obviously, the American,
And we now have the tape of the president's remarks this morning.
Today, we've had a national tragedy. 2 airplanes have crashed into the World Trade Center in an apparent terrorist attack on our country. I have spoken to the Vice President, to the Governor of New York, to the Director of the FBI, and have ordered that the full resources of the federal government go to help the victims and their families, and to conduct a full-scale investigation to hunt down and to find those folks who committed this act. Terrorism against our nation will not stand.
The president speaking this morning, and Jackie Leiden, obviously he has better information than we do, and we apologize again. This is just happened 35 minutes ago, and obviously we're still trying to sort this thing out.
Well, it is pointed, I think, that he is acknowledging it as terrorism, and I think that that is what this country has been afraid of, and the nation's defense chiefs have wrangled about. Where is the threat to America? Having been to a lot of places in the world where people live with us, I was most recently in Israel in May, this kind of dramatic attack on United States security. I mean, they've managed to hit quite a symbol, the World Trade Towers, which have been hit by terrorists before in 1993. Yet again, now the top of the building. Apart from hitting the White House itself, a horrifying thought, hitting the World Trade Towers is definitely a blow at the heart of America. I mean, it makes a statement by whoever did this.
Obviously, they present a ready target. They're a symbol.
What's so odd to me, looking at all this, looking at the sky, I mean, there is not a cloud in the sky today. If I were a pilot trying to navigate into the canyons of southern Manhattan, this would be such a perfect day. New York also has a primary election today. I mean, people will be madly racing, trying to think if this date doesn't have some anniversary importance, which we'll sort out later. I'm sure that people close to the scene are just trying to parcel out the chaos. But I think if you were the FBI and the defense chiefs, then you're trying to think not just who, but why and why now. And, of course, there would be a number of reasons for that.
Yes, after the bombing, I'm sure that security measures were improved. I'm talking about the bombing in the basement of the World Trade Center. And there are things you can do about that, but you don't think of an attack from the air. What can you do about that?
Well, I think this is really going to intensify the discussions, Bob, that will come on, American defense. And I think there have been arguments that this administration has been perhaps in some senses, out of touch with how to defend America, or wrestling with new ways to defend America. Where do the threats come from? As one thinks about threats from a nuclear power like China or Russia, I think for most average citizens, this is the portrait of terror. This is the portrait of feeling vulnerable to a lack of security. The idea, it's just so odd. I almost went. There's a major discount shopping center opposite to the World Trade Towers, and I nearly went there this morning to pick something up. I was going to try and get there before I started today's work on something else. And I'm thinking to myself, my God, I was nearly there. I would have, if I'd gotten off the subway, I would have gotten off the subway at the WTC, the World Trade Center. So I remember interviewing someone in Israel, in Tel Aviv, in 1994, a woman who'd been damaged by a bus bombing fairly mildly, but she had seen people dismembered, in front of her eyes, and she's saying, and I remember the line, because she said, this terrorism is coming to my door. It's coming to where I live. And, it just crossed my mind that I'd never had that experience. I'd always reported on other people's experience. And here I am. I'm looking out my window, and it's come to our backyards.
NPR's Jackie Leiden in Brooklyn, New York. Thank you. If you're just joining us, the World Trade Center in New York City in Lower Manhattan was hit by airplanes today, 2 of them. Each tower of the World Trade Center was struck by an airplane, which crashed into each tower of the building. NPR's Tom Jelton is at the Pentagon. Tom, according to Reuters, a bulletin from the Reuters news agency, a Palestinian group has claimed responsibility for the World Trade Center attack, and we heard President Bush say a while ago that he considers it an apparent terrorist attack.
Well, Bob, the one thing that I can add to those reports, which I can't confirm with respect to the Palestinian group, of course, but I can tell you that here at the Pentagon, they are saying that their information is that there was a hijacking. The American Airlines flight from Boston was hijacked, and it was a 767. That means a large twin-engine passenger plane. And so the indications are that one of the planes that crashed into the World Trade Center was, in fact, a hijacked plane. And that would certainly support the idea that this was, in fact, a terrorist attempt.
With passengers aboard, presumably.
Exactly, and heavy loss of life. Obviously, within the World Trade Center itself, from the 85th floor on up, and obviously also on board this airliner, which carries, of course, many passengers, and on a weekday morning, a flight from Boston would undoubtedly have a lot of passengers on board.
Now, was this the first of the 2 planes, Tom?
Well, Pentagon officials are not saying which was first and which was second. They refer to the passenger plane, the American Airlines plane that crashed into the World Trade Center, and another plane. And I guess they don't want to get too far out on a limb. Pentagon officials always want to be careful what they say. So they say, don't say, excuse me, they say, don't say first and second plane. They say the airliner and then another plane.
I'm trying to sort this out because I'm looking at a bulletin from the Associated Press which quotes a U.S. official saying the first plane to hit the World Trade Center was hijacked after takeoff from Boston. And yet, from eyewitness reports, the first plane was a small plane. The second plane was the larger plane, which would seem to conform to the 767 American Airlines plane. Perhaps they were both hijacked from Boston, but we don't know.
That is right. And that, I think, is why it's because of this confusion about which plane hit first and which was which that the Pentagon
is unlikely to say that the American Airlines flight was, in fact, the second flight.
Tom, there's a report that there's a fire at the Pentagon, and you were there. The Pentagon is a very big place, I know.
I just walked in and there was absolutely no sign of anything. However, just as we're talking now, Bob, I can hear a PA out in the corridor saying that all personnel should, and I think they're saying leave. I'm a ways away from the corridor. I do hear a PA speaker in the background right now. As I said, just a few moments ago when I was walking the corridors, there was no sign of any special activity.
I'm seeing reports on the wires now, part of the Pentagon being evacuated.
And we are also seeing on CNN right now, we see a report that the White House has been evacuated, and in fact, there are billows of smoke above what I can see is the old executive office building. In this picture, that certainly indicates that there must be some kind of fire in the White House area. I have not yet been able to confirm what's happening here at the Pentagon, but clearly something is happening here as well.
NPR's Tom Gelton at the Pentagon, which apparently is being evacuated. We're seeing television pictures of smoke near the White House. And earlier this morning, about 45 minutes or so ago, the World Trade Center in New York City was hit by two planes. Each tower, the World Trade Center has two towers, each 110 stories high, and both buildings were struck by airplanes on the upper floors in what President Bush described as an apparent terrorist attack. The president is in Florida this morning. He was promoting his education program. He was to read to school children. He is not at the White House, where we're seeing smoke this morning, and we don't know yet if there's any sort of concentrated attack in multiple places yet. But this is very strange to be a coincidence. So we apologize for not having as much information as we'd like to have, but that is what we know so far. The World Trade Center in New York City was hit by airplanes this morning. Each of the two towers of the World Trade Center was hit by an airplane in clear visibility in New York City. President Bush, who is in Florida, said that there was an apparent terrorist attack. The president is on his way back to Washington. The West Wing of the White House and the Capitol building reportedly both have been evacuated amid concerns over terrorist threats. And we heard momentarily ago from NPR's Tom Gelton at the Pentagon, where at least part of the Pentagon has been evacuated, and people were ordered to leave. According to the Reuters news agency, a Palestinian group has claimed responsibility for the New York World Trade Center plane attacks today. Abu Dhabi television reported it received a call from the Democratic Front for the Liberation of Palestine. Obviously, we'll be checking that out. That's just according to the Reuters news agency at the moment. And that is what we know now. Sorry to interrupt. This morning, just before 9 o'clock this morning, the World Trade Center in New York City was attacked by two aircraft, each two two planes striking both towers of the World Trade Center. There have been reports that a plane crashed into the helicopter landing pad near the Pentagon. All air traffic in the United States has been grounded today. As a result, President Bush calls this an apparent terrorist attack. The president is in the air. He's returning to Washington. Government buildings in Washington have been evacuated, the Treasury Department, the Capitol, the West Wing of the White House, as a precaution. And we are assembling as much information as we can, and we will be back to you shortly. This is Morning Edition from NPR News with special coverage of today's plane crashes into the World Trade Center in New York City. I'm Bob Edwards. Two aircraft crashed into the World Trade Center in Lower Manhattan about 18 minutes apart. These incidents occurred about an hour ago, Eastern Time. The FBI is investigating whether the planes were hijacked. President Bush was in Sarasota, Florida this morning to speak about education. He called today's incident a terrorist attack.
Today we've had a national tragedy. Two airplanes have crashed into the World Trade Center in an apparent terrorist attack on our country. I have spoken to the Vice President, to the Governor of New York, to the Director of the FBI, and have ordered that the full resources of the federal government go to help the victims and their families, and to conduct a full-scale investigation to hunt down and to find those folks who committed this act. Terrorism against our nation will not stand.
President Bush speaking this morning in Florida. He is on his way back to Washington now, cutting short his visit to Florida, where he was to promote his education programs this morning, reading to elementary school children. The president may be the only one in the air at this hour. The Federal Aviation Administration has grounded air traffic in the United States because of reports that these planes that crashed into the World Trade Center today, the reports that these planes were hijacked, so the FAA has grounded these air traffic. One of the towers of the World Trade Center appears to have completely collapsed. I am obviously watching television pictures. At least a good part of one tower has fallen to the ground. This is a 110-story building. Each of the two towers is 110 stories high. NPR's Jackie Leiden is in Brooklyn, New York, and she can see the World Trade Center from where she is. Jackie?
Well, I think it's fair to say that at this grave hour I can see the enormous columns of smoke where one of the trade towers used to be. Obviously, we don't know the extent of this horrendous damage at this time, and it'll be some hours before we do. What we do know is that this is a spectacularly brilliant morning in New York. Yesterday morning was thunderclouds and rain, and so the people behind this would have had a strikingly, a poor choice of words, a very, very clear target to strike this morning. You may be able to hear sirens behind me. I'm in Brooklyn, Bob, but every conceivable manner of emergency vehicle is in a convoy past this building on its way into Manhattan. You can hear helicopters overhead. I'm sure those are city helicopters. We are trying to sort this out at this hour, and one of the frustrating things is that telecommunications in New York is damaged, and so being able to talk to each other is limited. My mobile phone service, for example, is completely dead.
And not to raise alarm, but there have been reports that this could be a wider thing. Reports of a plane crash at the Pentagon. The West Wing of the White House has been evacuated as a precaution. The Treasury Building, the United States Capitol Building. We're going now to NPR's Jim Zarroli, who's in our New York bureau. Jim, what do you have? Jim Zarroli, are you here?
Hello.
Jim.
Hi. Well, I can tell you, as Jackie indicated, it's a pretty chaotic time in New York City right now. There's ever since the first explosion happened at 8:45 in the morning at One World Trade Center. Then about 18 minutes later, the second happened. There is an enormous amount of smoke and confusion and noise. Everywhere you go, you're hearing emergency vehicles, ambulances, fire trucks. In addition, the authorities have pretty much shut down much of the lower half of Manhattan. Bridges, tunnels have been sealed off. The 3 airports have been closed. Meanwhile, we're starting to hear reports of casualties. The people are beginning to come into the hospitals. It is obviously the World Trade Center is the center of the financial world in New York. 40,000 people work there. In addition, at that time of morning, a lot of people would have been traveling through the Trade Center on the subway, on the PATH train, coming to work in nearby buildings. There's a potential for a lot of casualties there.
And Mr. Alex Chichesky is joining us now. Mr. Chichesky, are you there?
Yes, hi. Greg Chesky, yes.
What did you see this morning?
I was on my way to work across the Brooklyn Bridge, and I was about a third of the way across heading to Manhattan when I saw a plane. And they're never on this approach on the East River because I walk it every day. And it was coming in over the Manhattan Bridge towards Lower Manhattan, and it banked very slightly towards Brooklyn, which told me that there was something wrong. And I thought it was going to crash, and then all of a sudden it swung over as if it was going towards Newark Airport, and hit the World Trade Center dead on.
Was this the first of the two?
This was the first plane, and then I was walking across the bridge. I thought it was an accident, and I wondered whether to turn back, figuring Lower Manhattan would be shut down. And I made it across it's 3/4 of the way across the bridge probably, and I was standing there with somebody I'd met who I know, and we watched as the other plane came in and hit it. I saw the other plane just as it sort of impacted the second plane.
So you didn't get a good look at the second plane?
No, I only saw it just as it hit.
Describe the first plane.
The first plane was, I'm not very good at planes, would have been like a 747, 737. It was a fairly large plane. So it would have held like maybe 120 to 150 people. And it was a silver undersides. The top, my memory is it was orange, but I'm not sure. I didn't recognize it as a particular brand. I didn't look up and say, oh, that's Delta, or oh, that's US Air.
But it was a commercial airliner.
That's the impression I got. It could have been a package service for all I know, but it was definitely it was a larger plane. It wasn't a small plane.
Thank you very much, sir.
Yes, certainly.
Jim Zaroli, back to you.
Yeah, I have to say it is an amazing sight to see. The 2 towers of the Trade Center both billowing smoke, and it looked to be a large part of the towers were damaged. Just a little while ago, we had this number 2 World Trade Center, the top part of it, which had been badly damaged. A lot of smoke, looked like it had toppled over. So there's obviously been an enormous amount of damage and confusion down there.
This is having ramifications everywhere. Air travel has been shut down at every airport across the country. Tunnels and roads into and out of Manhattan have been shut down. Trading at the New York Stock Exchange has been suspended. The Pentagon, the Capitol Building, the White House, the State Department, and the Treasury Building here in Washington all have been evacuated. According to U.S. officials and eyewitnesses, an aircraft crashed into the Pentagon today, setting off an explosion, throwing people off their feet inside the building and setting off a massive fire. And one eyewitness said the plane appeared to be an airliner. So precautions are being taken as if this were a coordinated terrorist attack, as President Bush indicated this morning. Again, the president is on his way back to Washington. He was in Florida promoting his education themes. NPR's Tom Jelton is at the Pentagon. Tom, do you know anything more about this crash, this report of a crash at the plane crash at the Pentagon?
Yeah, Bob, I was just evacuated from the Pentagon along with the thousands of other people who work there. 23,000 people work at the Pentagon. A plane did crash into what's essentially the southwest side of the building. There's smoke all over that part of the building, and it's billowing into the courtyard. It's impossible to get close for a good view of it, but that entire side of the Pentagon is blackened. I couldn't see the aircraft itself, so I couldn't tell you how large it was. The entire area around the crash site has been cordoned off. As you can imagine, there are helicopters, fire trucks, police, a lot of military personnel have been sort of instantly mobilized to herd people away from the Pentagon. But I did overhear on the radios of security personnel that there are people trapped inside the Pentagon who are unable to get out, trapped by smoke. The plane crashed into what in fact is a new wedge at the Pentagon. It has just been under construction. And we don't know, as I say, casualties. Some offices were clearly destroyed. There are a lot of distraught people. I spoke to one Air Force colonel who just happened to be down the hall when the plane hit, and he said it hit right into his office. He's extremely upset because he doesn't know who was injured there. But there clearly was a major attack on the Pentagon this morning.
A reminder, you're listening to NPR special coverage of this morning's tragic events, which began about an hour and 20 minutes ago when a plane struck the World Trade Center building in New York City. A second plane struck the second tower moments later, and part of one of those towers has since collapsed. Back to Tom Jelton now at the Pentagon.
Bob, who knows what's going on? Just before I was evacuated, I showed up at the Pentagon. I actually parked in the Pentagon North parking lot, and just as I parked, I saw a helicopter come swooping around, but there was not any sign of smoke when I got there. And just a few minutes later, of course, came the order to evacuate. But just before that, I had been speaking with a senior...
You're listening to NPR special coverage of this morning's tragic events, which began about an hour and 20 minutes ago when a plane struck the World Trade Center building in New York City. A second plane struck the second tower moments later, and part of one of those towers has since collapsed. Back to Tom Jelton now at the Pentagon.
Bob, who knows what's going on? Just before I was evacuated, I showed up at the Pentagon. I actually parked in the Pentagon North parking lot, and just as I parked, I saw a helicopter come swooping around, but there was not any sign of smoke when I got there. And just a few minutes later, of course, came the order to evacuate. But just before that, I had been speaking with a senior military officer, and he told me that the DoD had mobilized its crisis action team. This is a special Pentagon team that's mobilized in times of crisis or national emergency. It obviously works very closely with other agencies. And they already at that point, this was about a half hour ago or so, already at that point did have information that one of the planes that struck the World Trade Center had in fact been hijacked. So the assumption clearly is that this was a terrorist attack. And now that a plane has hit the Pentagon, it has to be considered not only a coordinated terrorist attack, but a very well-organized one, a very broad conspiracy, and one which the U.S. intelligence community was completely unprepared for. There was no threat condition alert at the Pentagon this morning. Evidently, there was no warning of this whatsoever. You know, the U.S. intelligence community casts a very wide net, but this one clearly caught it off guard.
And again, for what it's worth, the Reuters news agency is quoting Abu Dhabi television as saying it had received a call from the Democratic Front for the Liberation of Palestine, claiming responsibility for this morning's actions. Going back to New York briefly now to Mr. Stanley Mises. Are you there, sir?
I am.
And what did you see this morning?
Well, this morning I was sitting in my breakfast table when I heard this loud explosion. I ran downstairs and I saw smoke billowing out of the World Trade Center, and then just moments later another hit, and I live close to a mile away from the Trade Center, and you could feel the heat You could feel the heat right where I was standing, at least a mile away. It was unbelievable. Then later we're standing. I mean, it's so mind-boggling. You can't imagine, with thousands of people running across the avenue in every which direction. It's Day of the Locust squared. You can't imagine what it's like. Then finally, when things seemed to be calmed, I mean, calmed in the sense that we were watching the World Trade Center's two towers just billowing with smoke. Suddenly, the second Trade Center began to collapse, and there was a shower, like a meteorite shower, of sparks and debris and dust and a cloud of smoke, and the cloud of smoke seemed to come out of nowhere and traveled with a speed that was so frightening that people seemed to emerge out of a fog running away from it. It's the most terrifying thing I have ever witnessed in my life.
Mr. Stanley Mises in New York, thank you very much. Tom Jalton at the Pentagon?
Well, Bob, I can certainly reinforce those comments. The Pentagon attack was obviously far less serious than what happened at the World Trade Center. Nevertheless, there are many people missing, and there was a lot of anguish in the courtyard of the Pentagon. Just as I exited from the Pentagon a few moments ago, I was next to one man who could not locate his fiancée, who works in that area where the plane hit. So it's the Pentagon is very well guarded. It's near National Airport. There is significant air traffic control all around this area. But clearly, they were unable to stop this plane from crashing into the Pentagon. It underscores the vulnerability of the United States to determined terrorist attacks. These would clearly be suicide-type attacks. And, of course, there's been a lot of controversy about what kinds of threats the United States faces from its adversaries overseas. This administration has focused on the threat that could come from a long-range missile attack, but others have pointed out that much lower technology type attacks are perhaps a greater danger, and certainly what has happened this morning would seem to support that.
Back to New York for another eyewitness report. Ginger Miles, are you there?
Okay.
Can you tell us what you saw today?
Bob, what is more pressing is what we are experiencing right now. Our building is a block east of the trade towers, and I did see the explosions, and I worried about whether or not we should evacuate, but we thought not to because the street was so bad, and some part of the structure collapsed, and it's not on fire, but our whole apartment and the whole building is full of smoke, and we can't get out the front door because there's so much smoke debris there, but we're told that it's not fire. The streets right now are completely empty. So we've wet a bunch of towels. We've just wet a bunch of towels. I've just put my cat in a carrier. Cars are covered with dust. My whole apartment is covered with dust. So it looks like, though, that I don't think fire is going to be our problem. So that's all.
And you're one block from the World Trade Center?
East, yeah. East, one block east. Yeah.
How high up are you?
11th floor. 11th floor.
Can you see out your window?
Yeah.
What's going on out there?
It's dust. I mean, in other words, this is what we feared, that there would be an aftershock or whatever you call it. We can not even see the top of the trade towers where the fire is. He thinks one is not there anymore. Oh God, you can probably see it better than I can.
Yes, one of the towers, the upper part of it at least, has collapsed.
Well, that's what happened. That's why we have so much dust. That's because the dust, it didn't fall on us, but it fell close enough that it created a huge noise and then filled our house with smoke. We ran down the stairs only to discover that we couldn't get out. Nor would we even want out because it's so smoky out there. And now we've just got a suitcase of wet towels, and my roommate wants to talk to you here.
Yeah, so it seems like the South Tower disappeared, and we have a huge dust cloud which engulfed the whole block on Broadway and the area. And right now I see some people coming on the street with masks and it's just like after a blizzard, you know, it looks like covered gray dust. About from up here, 11th floor, it looks like.
So you couldn't get out of your building?
We went all the way down to about the second floor, but the dust was so thick, so you couldn't go in there. It's just you couldn't breathe. So we went. I thought it was better to go back up, where we had some air. So and then now the dust settled, so it looks like. I mean, I don't know what happened to all those people who were down there. And it's at least, I mean, on Broadway on the cars, it's about a 3-inch cover with dust. The cars on Broadway, just right up 2 blocks south of City Hall.
What about other people in your building? Are they trapped in their apartments?
When we were down, they all came to the conclusion it's better to stay in, and once we figured out it wasn't fire, it was just dust from the building. Now I can see one tower. The north tower is still standing, but the south tower disappeared because from just one thing, just not here anymore.
So the dust from the collapsed tower is what you think you're...
I'm quite sure that it's completely covered the area. And I could hear when it came, it sounded like a hurricane, and the building was shaking. And I thought maybe there's another plane hitting the area or something, but I think it was the dust from the collapsing building, which the things so it doesn't. I don't see any structural damage to buildings or I mean everything's covered with dust, and a few cars drove into the sidewalk, I guess, because it was probably turned day into night.
So you think the dust will settle and you'll be able to get out?
I can see from the 11th floor down to it's kind of. I mean, it's still in the air, but it dissipated. You know, the visibility, I would say, is about 50 or 100 yards.
Again, to remind our listeners, this is an eyewitness speaking to us from New York, just a block from the World Trade Center, which was attacked this morning by 2 planes. One plane hitting one tower, another plane hitting the second tower, the 110-story New York World Trade Center. One of those towers is no longer 110 stories. The upper part of it has collapsed, and the dust from that collapse is now engulfing this gentleman's apartment building, and he can't get out. There's also been a plane crash at the Pentagon, where NPR's Tom Jelton is standing by. Tom, what else do you know?
Well, Bob, I certainly can confirm that there was a direct hit on the Pentagon by an aircraft. I saw it. I didn't see it happen, but I saw the aftermath of it. I could not get close enough to actually see the point of impact and how much damage was done, nor could I determine what kind of plane it was. I'm now about 3 or 4 blocks southwest of the Pentagon, and now police, even in this area at this distance, are rushing people away. There are sirens going off around me. They're trying to get people even further away from the Pentagon. Clearly, at this point, it's hard to distinguish between what would be cautionary moves and moves that are in response to other events. I have, for example, just heard that the U.S. Capitol has been evacuated, the House and the Senate. That clearly was a precautionary move. Nothing has happened there. But when you've got a coordinated terrorist attack like this on the economic, financial, military institutions of our country, the security forces clearly feel they need to evacuate all the vulnerable points, and the Pentagon has been evacuated, and now we understand the Capitol as well.
The reports are that the planes that hit the World Trade Center may have been hijacked, and as a result, the Federal Aviation Administration has stopped air traffic at airports all across the country. Air Force One is flying. The president is returning from Florida, and NPR's Don Gagne joins us now from the White House.
Bob, I'm right across the street from Lafayette Park. At 9:41, of course, the president's not here this morning. At 9:41, the word went out from the White House, everybody out. They evacuated the press that was there, staff that was there. We could see people coming out of the White House kitchens. And initially, we all moved just onto the sidewalk in front of the White House. Then the park police came through just within moments and said everybody across the street into Lafayette Park. Then again, just minutes after that, park police again swept through and moved us all to the far north of the park, to the far north end of the park, before eventually police, some of them with machine guns, telling us to stand across the street, that we move across the street. So that's my vantage point right now, literally a block away from the White House, and I'm looking toward the front entrance. It's relatively quiet right now. There have been sirens everywhere, police trucks, fire trucks, police cars. Even at one point, about 10 minutes ago, a lone U.S. military fighter jet flew overhead and headed from the north, or from the south to the north, from the mall area, and then as it got over the White House, headed to the west. It was at a pretty high altitude, but that's what we know right now. No official word from anyone here on what actually may have prompted the evacuation at the White House, other than just a precautionary measure.
It's so difficult at the moment in all this confusion to sort out fact from other types of reports. Here is a bulletin from the Associated Press that says a car bomb exploded outside the State Department, according to senior law enforcement officials. Again, that's just an initial report. We don't know for sure. Maybe we'll find out more about that in a bit. Don, a while ago I saw a television picture of the White House and the Executive Office building, and it was a long shot, so it was difficult to pick out, but there was smoke.
I saw just wisps of that smoke in the air. The smoke would have been coming from the south side. Of course, I'm on the north side, which is where the press entrance is, and I haven't been able to get around much from where they've told us all to wait right here. So I can't say what that was or how close it might have been, or frankly, I haven't seen the TV pictures either to be able to compare that to what I saw.
Don, thank you very much, and we'll be getting back to you.
Okay,
Just to recap for our listeners, about an hour and a half ago, an airplane flew into one of the World Trade Center towers in Lower Manhattan in New York City. About 15 or 20 minutes later, a second plane hit the other tower of the World Trade Center. Moments later, there was a report of a plane crash at the Pentagon. There are reports that these planes were hijacked. Therefore, the Federal Aviation Administration has grounded air traffic in the United States. President Bush was not in the White House. He was in Florida this morning, promoting his education program. He is on his way back to Washington at this hour. There have been other ramifications. Trading at the New York Stock Exchange has been suspended. The Pentagon, the Capitol Building, the White House, the State Department, and the Treasury Building have all been evacuated as a precaution against more of what President Bush this morning characterized as an apparent terrorist attack. Tom Gelton is at the Pentagon. Tom?
Yeah, Bob, not exactly at the Pentagon, but certainly as close to the Pentagon as just about anybody can get right now, certainly a normal person like myself. I walked about 3 blocks west of the Pentagon. My cell phone was not working. As you can imagine, a lot of people are on their cell phones. I stopped at the first house with an open door that I could find, and a man, very cooperative, nice man by the name of Brian Perdue was here watching television. Bob, let me put him on the phone if you don't mind for a minute, because he can talk about what he heard in the moments before the plane crash.
Mr. Perdue?
Hello.
Hi, Bob Edwards,
Yes.
NPR. Tell us what you saw.
Well, I didn't see anything. I was upstairs watching TV about the bombing or the plane crash in the World Trade Center, and all of a sudden I heard a very low flying plane, and there's no way it could have been a single engine plane. There's no way it could have been a single engine plane, and I knew it crashed because I heard the noise and the windows shook in my house, and I'm like, I've got to get out of here. I mean, I'm sure like everyone else close by is that's around, and I'm like, I mean, it's really scary, really scary.
So you're thinking it's a larger plane?
I definitely think it was a larger plane. I mean, it was the noise and the way it flew by, or it sounded like it had landed in the backyard. And I guess literally it did. I mean, I'm right. My backyard is pretty much at the Pentagon. So, I mean, it was bigger than a single engine plane. I'm almost positive of that.
But you couldn't tell if it was a commercial airliner or not?
No, sir, I could not.
Okay, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
NPR's Jackie Leiden is in Brooklyn. Jackie?
Well, I think the most critical thing right now for New Yorkers is to hear from the mayor. And the mayor, ironically, Rudolph Giuliani, had built a command and control center for disasters of this kind in Tower 7 of the World Trade Center. It, of course, has been completely cut off. Thus, there's a great deal of frustration. There's been no word of casualties, no reports yet by the city. Obviously, they're having difficulty getting the word out. I'm listening to local radio, our local member station, WNYC, as I listen to you. They are not sure how much longer they'll be able to be on the air. Their transmitter is down there. So we have a kind of communications crisis enveloping us here, along with what we can see. And as you know, you're hearing mostly eyewitness accounts, which have just the tiniest bit of information. I can see the World Trade Center was part of my skyline, and where that tower had been is the top of the tower, the North Tower, is just a cloud of white dust now. And with New York's Command and Control Center being in there, you can just imagine the kind of difficulties that are going on here.
Was it the North Tower that collapsed? I'm looking at a wire copy. It says it was the Southern Tower that collapsed.
Perhaps it was the Southern Tower.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, I think you're right.
Yeah. And one of the planes, I'm also reading, one of the planes that crashed into the Trade Center was American Airlines Flight 11, hijacked after takeoff from Boston en route to Los Angeles, according to officials of American Airlines. Both towers now have collapsed. Jackie, can you see that?
Yeah, okay. Well, I can't. What I see are these clouds of smoke. Okay, well, that would make sense. I mean, a horrible kind of sense, because I had thought for sure the North Tower, and if it's both towers, then that's what you're reading. Bob, all you can see, it's like looking at the top for me, for a lot of New Yorkers, that's our Mount Everest, and the top of it, what I could normally see above the tree line is gone. I mean, it's just clouds of white dust. It's horrifying, I have to say. It's chilling to look at, and in some ways, those of us across the river from Manhattan probably, have this view the most clearly. It's just, it is just, I think, everyone's worst nightmare, and we are now living it out, sorting it out.
Jackie, thank you very much. Dr. Elliot Cohn joins me now. He is Director for Strategic Studies at Johns Hopkins. Good morning, sir.
Good morning.
There is a report from the Reuters news agency, and I hope to find further information on this. Reuters quoting Abu Dhabi television as saying it had received a call from the Democratic Front for the Liberation of Palestine, claiming responsibility for the plane crashes into the World Trade Center building this morning. Do you know anything about this group?
Yeah, they've been around for quite some time, and they're one of the more extreme and dangerous Palestinian terrorist organizations. But I think, it'll take quite a while, obviously, to sort this out and figure out exactly who did what. There's clearly several very sophisticated operations to coordinate all these things, assuming that what occurred at the Pentagon is also part of this. It bespeaks quite a large effort. And I think one thing that's very important to remember is it's very hard for these organizations to do what they do unless they have some kind of shelter or support from states.
Okay. I'm now receiving information that a spokesman for this very group denies responsibility. Yeah. This is what happens when all of these multiple reports come in and you try to sort out fact from fiction and who said what about whom, and And we're very sorry if, in fact, that's the case, that that group is not responsible. But now we have a report that it is and another that it isn't. And ultimately we'll get it squared away, and I'm sorry for the confusion.
Yeah. Well, it's going to take a while to sort it out. But I think here's what I think the key point is. What we're dealing with here is not crime. It's a hideous form of warfare. And I think the Pearl Harbor analogy is going to turn out to be roughly the right one. That is to say, in terms of the scale of loss of life, this will probably be a bigger deal, I'm afraid, than Pearl Harbor, certainly on the same scale. But the thing to remember is that this is not just the work of a couple of deranged people. This is the kind of thing that is done for political reasons, and it will require some kind of warlike response.
It's with two attacks in New York and one in Washington, one certainly gets the impression of a coordinated terrorist attack, obviously well thought out, well planned, and clearly well executed. Who could have pulled off something like this?
Well, there are quite a few groups out there that would like to try this. One thing to remember is that a number of these organizations have various kinds of links with one another. So you may be dealing in some ways with a kind of coalition of groups. But again, I would also fall back on the issue of state sponsorship. These groups simply cannot function unless they have places that they can go where they will be sheltered by the institutions of a state. In the past, that's Syria and Iran have been two of the leading offenders, of course, Iraq as well. Without some kind of state protection, it's very, very hard for these organizations to flourish. So it's going to be a question of going both after the organizations, but also going really hard after the states. We've been rather unwilling in recent years to talk about countries as sponsors of state terrorism or facilitators, but that's what a number of them are, and we're going to need to turn the spotlight on them. Again, I'd stress there's a difference between crime and war, and this is war.
Indeed, Dr. Cohn, just think about what has just happened. I mean, the United States has practically been shut down here. All commercial flights canceled. The planes have been diverted to Canada. The stock market has stopped trading. The Pentagon, the Capitol, the West Wing of the White House, the State Department, and the Treasury all evacuated. I don't know about you, but I'm feeling rather vulnerable here. The country has been shut down, in effect.
Absolutely, but I think, as awful as these events are, it's important not to lose our heads. This is the most powerful country in the world. What's going to happen as a result of this will be, I expect, a wave of fury on the part of the American people, which is entirely appropriate, and a focusing of all the enormous energy and resources this country has. And once that happens, there will eventually be results, as long as we're willing to treat this the way we should, like a war. And I'm sure people had exactly the same sense of vulnerability at the time of Pearl Harbor, and the people who launched that found out to their later regret that when you get the United States really, really mad, that you're going to find all kinds of resources mobilized against you, which will be absolutely overwhelming. And I'm quite confident that in the long run, however chaotic things seem, however horribly upsetting and distressing this is, the United States will be able to bounce back. This is a pretty tough country. We didn't get to be where we are without it, and there will be a response.
You wonder how this could have been prevented. We have measures to guard against hijacking of airplanes, and that's what we had today, the hijacking of airplanes and the crashing them into public buildings.
Well, we haven't had nearly as active a program, I think, since the heyday of the particularly Palestinian hijackings in the 1970s. There was a real period where there was a lot of that. You had armed marshals on airplanes. We'll probably go back to that. But the point is this. I think if you really want to disrupt these organizations, you're going to have to do things we're not willing to do. And that means things like killing people. I would, by and large, the CIA now does not send people out to knock off members of organizations like this. We don't do that as a matter of policy. That may very well change. We will beat up on some states that harbor terrorists, Sudan and Afghanistan. We will not do violent things to others, like Syria and Iran. to a remarkable extent, the velvet gloves have been on in the war against terrorism. Given the history of the United States, I expect the gloves to come off.
Dr. Cohn, thank you very much.
You're very welcome.
Dr. Elliot Cohn, the Director for Strategic Studies at Johns Hopkins. NPR's David Welna is on Capitol Hill. David, what's happening there?
Bob, the Capitol, as you said, was evacuated almost an hour ago. Speaker of the House, Dennis Hastert, ordered the Capitol and the surrounding office buildings to be evacuated. Of course, this is a precautionary move. There has been no attack on Capitol Hill. However, there are thousands of people who worked in these buildings who streamed out. Initially, they were just outside the Capitol. Police pushed them back 1 block, then 2 blocks, then 3 blocks. And just about 10 minutes ago, the order went out for everyone to go home. I just spoke with several members of Congress, House members. One of them said he had an intelligence report that there were 2 planes spotted in the sky that were considered potential aggressors. That is one of the reasons why members of Congress were told to get as far away as possible from the Capitol. I spoke with Congressman Ike Skelton, a Democrat from Missouri and a member of the Armed Services Committee, who said that just recently the director of the CIA warned that there could be an attack, an imminent attack on the United States of this nature. So this was not entirely unexpected. Several members of Congress have talked about the need to step up domestic defense in light of this. There's been a lot of talk about National Missile Defense Shield, and of course what's happened today would not be the kind of event that could be stopped by such a shield, and there's talk already of shifting money into beefing up the National Guard, taking other measures to heighten security domestically to prevent what seem to be further attacks of this nature.
Of course, they have taken precautions. They take precautions every day on Capitol Hill. It's been the scene of several shootings and a bombing.
Yes, indeed. And in fact, I think that the kind of precautions they take for everybody who enters the Capitol and the adjacent office buildings gave some reassurance to those who were inside. To go in this morning, I had to take out my cell phone and put it through a metal detector, plus my shoulder bag, put it through. I had to walk through a metal detector. There are also dogs that sniff out explosives. These kinds of precautions have all been instituted in the wake of Capitol shootings, and so they are on high alert all the time at the Capitol. However, when I walked into the building this morning, the World Trade Center had already been hit by these planes. I asked Capitol Police if they had been put on any special alert. They said they didn't know of any order of such sort going out. However, within half an hour, the order had come out to evacuate the Capitol.
NPR's David Welna at the Capitol. Martin Costi joins me now. Martin, what do you have?
Well, Bob, information is coming in from around the country that local officials are looking for similarly prominent buildings and evacuating them, making them less of a target. For example, in Chicago, the Sears Tower has been evacuated. The Chicago Mercantile Exchange has been cleared of employees. The John Hancock Center is being evacuated after the mayor's office called management there and asked them to clear out the building. It looks like they're in Chicago. They're looking at likely targets, prominent buildings, and clearing them out. In L.A., in Los Angeles right now, the police department is on what they call tactical alert. They went on that state of readiness right after news of the incident at the World Trade Center came through. There have been no threats so far, according to the Associated Press, in Los Angeles that the police know of. Officer Guillermo Campos of the Anti-Terrorist Division says they are on a citywide tactical alert in Los Angeles, and their Anti-Terrorist Division is mobilized. That means that officers from earlier shifts are held over to make sure they have extra officers on the ready. As has been reported already all morning, the air traffic has been halted. No planes are being allowed to take off. And also some airports are now closing. That's the case in Atlanta, where no planes already early on had been allowed to leave. In downtown Atlanta, the CNN Center is closed, except for vital operations, probably. The Atlanta airport has been closed. FBI has sent agents to the scene, to the airport, but so far no specific threats have been received in Atlanta. In California, 29 Palms, the Marines say they have increased their state of readiness to what they call vigilance. So it looks like people are looking for obvious next targets, if there are any, and trying to make them less vulnerable.
Martin Costi, thank you. Going to New York now, where Robert Mueller is at the White Horse Tavern in New York. Mr. Mueller?
Yes, sir.
What did you see today?
Lots of smoke, lots of debris, lots of people panicking, a lot of dust. It's very bad.
Where are you now in relation to the World Trade Center?
I am about a half a mile away.
And what is going on there as far as security and police?
All the police seem to be at the scene. The streets are pretty much to the people, but the people aren't panicking. There's no rioting, no looting. People are just, very, very, very shocked at what's going on.
You had both towers of the World Trade Center collapse today.
Yes, they have. They're gone.
And that must have, you must have felt it.
Excuse me, I'm having trouble hearing you.
I'm sure you are. I'm sure you must have felt the impact of the...
Actually, no. Just, they just crumbled. There was no impact. There was lots of debris, though, that spread over for a mile. There's like an inch of dust on the ground for a mile away from the actual World Trade Center explosion. When the second plane impacted, though, we felt the explosion, and when the first also.
Thank you very much.
Okay, Bob.
Robert Mueller, eyewitness in New York City. Again, to remind you, we're in special coverage now of events that have taken place in New York City and in Washington, D.C. today, beginning nearly 2 hours ago, when an airplane struck one of the two towers of the World Trade Center in Manhattan. Moments later, a second plane struck the second tower of the World Trade Center. The tops of those two towers have now collapsed into the streets of lower Manhattan. A bit later, there was a plane crash at the Pentagon. And other government buildings in Washington have been evacuated as a precaution. The Pentagon, the Capitol, the White House, the State Department, and the Treasury Building. President Bush is in flight. He was in Florida this morning. He is returning to Washington, D.C. The president has described today's actions as an apparent terrorist attack. And NPR's Martin Costi is in the studio with me. Martin.
Bob, as we're monitoring news from around the country, the air traffic has been stopped. No commercial aviation is allowed to be taking off right now. Airports are closing around the country. In Chicago, prominent landmarks are being closed. L.A. police are in a special state of readiness. Extra police are being put on around the country in many major cities. The apparent terrorist attacks are causing disbelief, especially in the West, where people are waking up to this. People are watching these incidents with horror, and the reaction coming in from local officials is that of making sure that their prominent landmarks aren't similarly attacked.
There's so many things coming in from all over the place. Somerset County Airport, 80 miles southeast of Pittsburgh. Is this a plane crash? I can't tell. I have the back end of a report. Secretary of State Colin Powell, who's visiting, he was in Peru this morning. He was to go to Colombia on his first official visit to South America, and he is returning to Washington following all of these reports. Martin, you have more?
Well, there's more information about the American Airlines plane that crashed into the Trade Center this morning. One of the two planes that crashed into the World Trade Center, I should say, was American Airlines Flight 11 from Boston to Los Angeles. A spokesperson for the airline says that the flight could carry up to 158 passengers. It's not clear yet how many passengers were on board. They're still trying to figure out what happened exactly there. It looks as though in places such as Texas, in Houston and Dallas, police are being called onto special tactical alert or variants of that sort of special readiness. Airports are closing, even with air traffic has been stopped, and airports are also closing. People are being sent home in many cities. There's a quote here from the Birmingham International Airport in Alabama, where spokeswoman Carol Windham says, like everyone, we're in shock and they're grounding their planes. Heightened security is in effect at government and corporate offices nationwide, from the Army's main germ warfare defense laboratory in Frederick, Maryland, to city offices in Colorado. In Denver, a spokesman says he doesn't think any place in America right now is not at risk or doesn't feel at risk. And emergency preparedness officials in Colorado are organizing themselves. In Philadelphia, dozens of people gathered in a hotel lounge to watch television coverage and started weeping. They could not believe what they said, what they saw.
The Federal Aviation Administration has grounded air traffic in the United States today because of reports that the planes that struck the World Trade Center towers in New York City were hijacked. Therefore, traffic has been diverted elsewhere. A lot of American air traffic was sent to Canada. But Air Force One is flying, bringing the president back to Washington from Florida, where he was this morning to promote his education policies. Earlier this morning, I spoke with two eyewitnesses who saw the World Trade Center blast in New York City. The first voice will be that of Stanley Mikus. The second voice will be that of Ginger Miles.
I was sitting in my breakfast table when I heard this loud explosion. I ran downstairs and I saw smoke billowing out of the World Trade Center, and then just moments later, another hit, and I live close to a mile away from the Trade Center, and you could feel the heat. You could feel the heat right where I was standing, at least a mile away. It was unbelievable.
I was on my way to work across the Brooklyn Bridge, and I was about a third of the way across heading to Manhattan when I saw a plane. And they're never on this approach on the East River because I walk it every day. And it was coming in over the Manhattan Bridge towards Lower Manhattan, and it banked very slightly towards Brooklyn, which told me that there was something wrong. And I thought it was going to crash. And then all of a sudden it swung over as if it was going towards Newark Airport, and hit the World Trade Center dead on.
Our building is a block east of the trade towers, and I did see the explosions, and I worried about whether or not we should evacuate, but we thought not to because the street was so bad, and some part of the structure collapsed, and it's not on fire, but our whole apartment and the whole building is full of smoke, and we can't get out the front door because there's so much smoke debris there that we're told that it's not fire. The streets right now are completely empty. So we've wet a bunch of towels. We've just wet a bunch of towels. I've just put my cat in a carrier. Cars are covered with dust. My whole apartment is covered with dust. So it looks like, though, that I don't think fire is going to be our problem. So that's all.
That was Ginger Miles, who's trapped in an apartment building in New York City because of all the dust from the collapse of the World Trade Center towers just a block from her apartment building. Before that, you heard from another eyewitness this morning in New York, Stanley Mikus. And we're going back to New York now for another, Kathleen Zichi. Are you there?
Yes, I am.
Good morning.
Good morning.
And what can you tell us?
I can tell you that we've had a steady stream of patients at NYU Downtown Hospital since the first explosion occurred. The hospital is very well equipped to deal with the situation. Unfortunately, as we have mobilized the entire medical staff and the nursing staff, they are functioning very, very well. We were the first responder to the explosion at the Trade Center in '93, so unfortunately we have some prior experience with situations of this nature.
You're at New York University Hospital.
We are at NYU Downtown Hospital in Lower Manhattan, and we are the only hospital in downtown New York.
That just staggers the imagination. There are going to be so many casualties in your hospital today.
There are hundreds of people here presently. We have transformed the cafeteria in order to be able to triage the patients properly. They are being handled in a very orderly way, and the staff is doing a superlative job.
Ms. Zichi, thank you very much.
I'm grateful for your call. Thank you.
To Tom Gelton now at the Pentagon. Tom?
I'm now standing on a hill just to the on the southwest side of the Pentagon, overlooking the Pentagon. I have a very good view of the damage. There is a major fire at the Pentagon, and what's more frightening, a big notch has been taken out of the Pentagon. Of the full 6-story height of the Pentagon is gone. The notch is about, I'd say, 100 feet, 75 feet wide. So it's taken out a notch of the Pentagon on the southwest side. Flames are still shooting out of there. Of course, there's a lot of black smoke. Firefighting equipment is all around. There's also flames on the ground just in front of the Pentagon there, and that, my guess, would be debris from the plane that hit into the Pentagon at that point. So clearly the fire is not under control. There are a lot of fire trucks there. There's a helicopter overhead, but there's got to be major loss of life here at the Pentagon as well as in New York.
There are 5 rings to the Pentagon. You're looking at the outside of the 5th, the outer ring?
That's well, yes, but the notch goes all the way through. So I can't see all the way through because of the smoke, but it's a major section, like I say, a notch in the Pentagon that is just gone.
Over to Don Gagne, who is near the White House.
Bob, we have been moved a bit further away. They keep widening the security perimeter here. I'm at the corner of Connecticut and 8th Street, able to look at the White House across Lafayette. It's actually quieted down here in the last 20 minutes or so. We're not getting any official information from any of the White House press personnel. But at 9:41 this morning, so just an hour and 15 minutes ago, the White House was evacuated. All the staff, all the press. Everybody in there was brought out, and we now wait at this vantage point. There is a representative, a spokesman from the District of Columbia Fire Department here. He has just told us that they have gone to an emergency level of emergency where all off-duty personnel are being called into work. He's not able to speak to any specific threat or anything that may have actually happened at the White House, and we have not, I should make it clear, heard of anything specific. There has been a report of a fire at the mall, which would be on the south side of the White House, but he's telling us that he has gone over there and has not been able to confirm it, has not seen any smoke. There have been ambulances and fire trucks everywhere around here. But again, for now, it's quiet, and we're waiting to see if we can get some more information.
Steve Inskeep might be a little closer. He is near the State Department. Steve?
Bob, I'm actually outside the Pentagon on the highway overlooking the Pentagon. I'm looking at one of the west sides of this. I believe it is what is known as the mall entrance of the Pentagon, and looking at this enormous notch, as I think someone else described it, that has been cut in the building here. It is from the top of the building all the way down to the bottom. Pardon me while that emergency vehicle passes. All the way down to the bottom, and an enormous gap has been cut in this building. Much of the rest of the wall is blackened, and a fire truck is now spraying water on that. I spoke just a little while ago to a U.S. Army lieutenant colonel who was inside the building and not very far. He said that he was in the building. They'd actually turned on the television in the office. They were watching coverage of the explosions at the World Trade Center in New York City, and all of a sudden an enormous explosion rocked their building. They got a bunch of people together and tried to move toward the site of the explosion to rescue people, and were unable to get anywhere near because of what he described as the intense heat. And I have to tell you, Bob, it's been a little while since I've been in the Pentagon, but I believe that is an area where the United States Army has quite a few offices, including some senior officers. And at that time in the morning, it would have been very full.
NPR's Steve Inskeep at the Pentagon. Just to recap, there have been Plane crashes today in New York City at the World Trade Center. Both towers, the tops of both towers have now collapsed. There was a plane crash today at the Pentagon in Washington, D.C. Government buildings have been evacuated as a precaution. The president is returning to Washington, and we will be back to you soon with more. Good morning. You're listening to special coverage of tragic events that have occurred today in New York City and in Washington, D.C. I'm going to go through just a timeline of today's events as compiled by the Associated Press. Plane crashes into tower of World Trade Center in Lower Manhattan shortly before 9 a.m. Eastern Time. Then shortly after 9 a.m. Eastern Time, a second plane crashed into the second tower of the World Trade Center. President Bush in Sarasota, Florida, earlier this morning called the crashes an apparent terrorist attack and a national tragedy. Then an aircraft crashed near the Pentagon, just outside of Washington, D.C., in Northern Virginia, about an hour after those attacks in New York. Government buildings in Washington, including the Capitol and the White House, were evacuated, also the Treasury Department and the State Department, with officials citing a credible threat of a terrorist attack. The Federal Aviation Administration shut down all aircraft takeoffs nationwide. If you were planning to take a plane flight in the United States of America today, forget it. It will not happen. Much of American air traffic has been diverted to Canada. Shortly after 10 o'clock this morning, an hour ago, Eastern Time, one of the World Trade Center towers in New York City collapsed about an hour after being hit by a plane. American Airlines said that one of the planes that crashed into the Trade Center was American Airlines Flight 11, hijacked after takeoff from Boston en route to Los Angeles. There was a report this morning that senior law enforcement officials said that a car bomb exploded outside of the State Department in Washington, D.C. I have not seen that report repeated this morning. Financial markets suspended trading in the wake of the attacks. At 10:28 a.m. Eastern Time, about a half an hour ago, the second tower of the World Trade Center collapsed. New Yorkers were to vote today in a mayoral primary. If you are a New Yorker, you're listening now, forget it. You will not vote today. That primary has been called off. Tunnels and roads into and out of Manhattan have been shut down. And NPR's Jackie Leiden is in Brooklyn, New York, and has been watching the scene that she sees far away in the World Trade Center. Jackie?
Well, Bob, as I'm listening to that recap and as these events settle in this last hour, I think we're all just beginning to now absorb the gravity of this coordinated terrorist attack. I mean, I have been watching when I haven't been listening to you or on the computer, the way the different clouds of smoke are changing over the Manhattan skyline from gray to white. As I have mentioned in earlier conversations, my backdoor view from a third floor loft is the World Trade Towers, and the unimaginable horror is that they are gone. And as bad as that, we don't have much notion of how many casualties, to what extent. I'm sure it's to a very great, severe extent, the loss of life. Eyewitness reports from around the building that I've heard have been fairly calm, but only one hospital operates in Lower Manhattan. Manhattan, and for that matter, Brooklyn across the river, are at a standstill. You can't take the subway. You can't drive. I am awaiting instructions if I should bicycle into the scene later or stay here by the telephone. I think this is going to go down as one of our darkest days in American history.
NPR's Tom Jelton is at the Pentagon, where a plane has crashed into that building. Tom?
Yeah, Bob, I had gotten here just about 9:30 this morning, and moments after I arrived, there was an order to evacuate. I didn't actually hear the crash. It happened on the west side of the Pentagon. I enter on the exact opposite side, on the Potomac River side. But I am now over here on a hill overlooking the Pentagon. I'm just about a half a mile from it, directly opposite where the aircraft hit the Pentagon. It is just a stunning sight, Bob, as you've heard from others before. You know how tough the Pentagon is. This is a building that was built 50 years ago to withstand direct attack. The walls are solid concrete and very thick. This aircraft, and it must have been a large one, cut right through the Pentagon, leaving a gap. There's a notch, a wide notch from top to bottom. It had just taken out a whole chunk of the Pentagon on the west side here. And that's at least 6 stories from top to bottom. And as far as I can see, it looks like it goes almost all the way through. There would be hundreds of people that would have been affected by that. That is in the new section of the Pentagon. The Air Force, a number of senior general Air Force officers have their offices there. There is still flames coming from the Pentagon and firefighting going on. The fire is not yet under control, but this is just a major attack on the Pentagon.
Tom Shelton, thank you very much. Michelle Flournoy is a senior advisor at the Center for Strategic Studies. Are you with me?
Yes, I am.
Thank you. I can never be sure. I'm sorry. Since people are coming at me from all directions here. What do you make of what has happened today? A multiple attack, apparently, and again, if it would be an extraordinary coincidence if it were a coincidence, attacks in 2 cities, on the World Trade Center in New York and on the Pentagon here in Washington.
I think it is a terrible tragedy. I think in all probability it is a coordinated terrorist attack, and I think it's unprecedented in terms of the level of coordination and the scale. And while Oklahoma City was certainly a wake-up call, I think this is really going to get our attention in a different way as a nation, and I think it's going to force us to reevaluate a whole number of things in response.
You've been in a number of meetings, I'm sure, where you've tried to imagine the worst that could happen.
Mm-hmm.
This has to be getting close to that.
It is very close in terms of the number of casualties that will result from this, in terms of the degree of vulnerability that it will cause people to feel walking around downtown New York, Washington, and any other major American city. I think the only thing that could have made it worse is if there were chemical or biological weapons involved or something that would increase the casualty level even further. But I think it's very bad, and I do think it will force us to rethink how we are prepared as a nation to deal with terrorism.
What sort of contingencies are discussed when these matters come up before you planners and people who have to prepare us for this?
Well, contingencies like this, attacks on major symbols of American power, which we had today. Both the World Trade Center is certainly a symbol of American economic power and leadership, and also obviously the Pentagon is a symbol of our military power. I think the worst cases that we tend to consider are multiple coordinated attacks, and in the past some people have discounted the possibility of that, but I think obviously now that's proven to be, it's quite clear that it can happen. I do think that it's going to cause us to think about whether we need to take additional security steps to safeguard ourselves against this type of threat. Americans are we have an open society. It's part of our national character. We tend to embrace our civil liberties and protect them fiercely, but I think there are certain trade-offs between those liberties and the kind of security that we might want to heighten in the future, and those trade-offs are going to be on the agenda following this experience.
But there are security measures having to do with hijacked planes, and that's what we had today. Apparently, hijacked planes flown into the World Trade Center and
yes.
possibly the Pentagon.
Yes. I think in the case of the Pentagon, one of the challenges is that it's so closely situated next to National Airport, so literally hundreds, if not thousands, of flights pass near or even directly over the Pentagon on a daily basis. I think that situation will probably be reevaluated in the future as to whether we need to cordon off part of that airspace and protect it more fiercely in the future.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Michelle Flournoy is a senior advisor at the Center for Strategic Studies. We've been discussing today's airplane crashes into the World Trade Center towers, both towers in New York City. The two towers, much of them have collapsed since after much fire. And a plane crash into the Pentagon in Arlington, Virginia, just outside Washington, D.C. World leaders have reacted to what's been going on here this morning. Russia's President Vladimir Putin expressed deep sympathy to the people of the United States. He said he had been informed immediately of the attacks. Britain's Prime Minister Tony Blair said he was rushing back to London from a trade union conference in response. The Foreign Secretary, Jack Straw, said that Britain offered whatever it could to help the United States government to bring the perpetrators to justice. This is assuming that this is a terrorist attack. President Bush said this morning before he left Florida, he described it as an apparent terrorist attack. German air traffic authorities said all European flights to the United States had been suspended after this morning's incidents. The Federal Aviation Administration has grounded American aircraft. Flights have been diverted to Canada. Again, this is a precaution because it is suspected that the planes that struck the World Trade Center this morning were hijacked planes. So to prevent any more of that, the air traffic in the United States is shut down today, except for Air Force One, which is carrying President Bush back from Florida, where this morning he was promoting his education program. Martin Costi, what else do you have for me?
Well, Bob, we have more information from around the country as the shock starts to turn into action in terms of securing some of the more likely targets if these apparent attacks continue. Some federal buildings now are being reported to be closing outside of the Washington area as well as in Washington. In Dallas-Fort Worth, the reports that federal buildings there are closing. Military installations are preparing for a change in status, if not already changing. In Virginia, Navy installations in Hampton Roads, the world's largest Navy base, are under increased security. They call that ThreatCon Charlie. That's implemented as a condition that's implemented when an incident occurs, when intelligence is received that some sort of terrorist action is imminent. In New Jersey, all airports and river crossings to New York City are closed. Traffic is snarling on the New Jersey Turnpike, completely backed up. Commuter trains canceled. Newark International Airport, officers with shotguns blocked the road leading to the Port Authority offices and the Air Traffic Control Tower. In Minneapolis, Minnesota, the IDS Center, the tallest building in the state, has been evacuated, also as a precaution because of its possibility as a target because of its prominence. Airports are closing, of course, because of the FAA order to halt air traffic. In New York State, again, security is heightened across the state. There are plans to increase security at border points. Governor Pataki has canceled his events for the day. In California, the state is on high alert. The state's emergency council convened as Governor Gray Davis requested heightened security at all state buildings. And in Tennessee, the Department of Energy's nuclear weapons and research complex at Oak Ridge is under heightened security. And all flights from Tennessee's major airports are grounded. Chemical plants are increasing their security. And overseas in South America, Secretary of State Colin Powell is returning to the United States, interrupting his tour of Colombia and Peru. He was informed this morning when he was having breakfast with newly elected and Peruvian President Alejandro Toledo of the incidents, and he immediately made plans to return. He will make brief comments to a meeting of the local leaders who are meeting in Lima and will head home immediately. Bob?
A plane crashed this morning in Pennsylvania. It is not known if this is connected to the crashes in New York City and in Washington. It was a 747 jumbo jet, crashed about 10 o'clock Eastern Time, about 8 miles east of Jennerstown, Pennsylvania. This would be the fourth plane crash in the United States this morning. 2 at the New York World Trade Center, 1 at the Pentagon, and a fourth with, it's not known if there's any connection at all. I hate to speak of a normal plane crash, but a 747 jumbo jet in Pennsylvania. Shortly after this morning's explosions at the World Trade Center, President Bush was in Florida and had this to say.
Today we've had a national tragedy. 2 airplanes have crashed into the World Trade Center in an apparent terrorist attack on our country. I have spoken to the Vice President, to the Governor of New York, to the Director of the FBI, and have ordered that the full resources of the federal government go to help the victims and their families and to conduct a full-scale investigation to hunt down and to find those folks who committed this act. Terrorism against our nation will not stand.
President Bush speaking this morning in Florida. He is now on his way back to Washington, D.C. from Florida. Apparently the president believes this is, he described it as an apparent terrorist attack. This morning I spoke with a couple of witnesses in New York City who were near the explosion at the World Trade Center.
I was sitting in my breakfast table when I heard this loud explosion. I ran downstairs and I saw smoke billowing out of the World Trade Center, and then just moments later another hit, and I live close to a mile away from the Trade Center, and you could feel the heat. You could feel the heat right where I was standing, at least a mile away. It was unbelievable.
I was on my way to work across the Brooklyn Bridge, and I was about a third of the way across heading to Manhattan when I saw a plane. And they're never on this approach on the East River because I walk it every day. And it was coming in over the Manhattan Bridge towards Lower Manhattan, and it banked very slightly towards Brooklyn, which told me that there was something wrong. And I thought it was going to crash. And then all of a sudden, it swung over as if it was going towards Newark Airport, and hit the World Trade Center dead on.
Our building is a block east of the trade towers, and I did see the explosions. And I worried about whether or not we should evacuate, but we thought not to because the street was so bad. And some part of the structure collapsed, and it's not on fire, but our whole apartment and the whole building is full of smoke. And we can't get out the front door because there's so much smoke debris there. But we're told that it's not fire. The streets right now are completely empty. So we've wet a bunch of towels. We've just wet a bunch of towels. I've just put my cat in a carrier. Cars are covered with dust. My whole apartment is covered with dust. So it looks like, though, that I don't think fire is going to be our problem. So that's all.
The experiences of several New Yorkers this morning after the plane crashes at the World Trade Center and the subsequent collapse of the 2 towers, or most of the 2 towers of the World Trade Center. Each of those towers was 110 stories high. They are no longer 110 stories high. Kathleen Zicci is a senior manager at New York University Hospital in downtown New York. Ms. Zicci?
Yes.
It's
NYU Downtown Hospital.
What's the scene there today?
We have a very, very high volume of patients who've been coming steadily through the door since the first explosion occurred. We feel that we're very well equipped to handle this disaster. Unfortunately, we have had prior experience in terms of the World Trade Center explosion in '93, the cafeteria has been converted to a triage area. We have wall-to-wall patients in there now. Many of the injuries that we are seeing are somewhat superficial. It would be very difficult for me to give you a patient count because the volume of patients is so high and they are coming through the door steadily.
I'm sure you are well equipped, but given the volume of patients that you could be expecting, what do you do about that? Where can you divert these patients to other facilities?
We have a disaster plan in place at the hospital that has a very specific set of guidelines in terms of helping us to pull in the resources that we need to handle a situation of this type. We are also part of a network of hospitals, and they have offered their support. We've had many volunteers who have come through who have offered to donate blood. So we have had a tremendous amount of support from our community in terms of our response.
You must be expecting hundreds and hundreds.
We have hundreds and hundreds here now, and we are expecting additional patients.
Ms. Ichi, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Jackie Leiden is in New York City. Jackie?
Well, Bob, I think that for New Yorkers, the nightmare continues to unfold. Every street is now gridlocked with traffic. Subways are shut down. There are reports of difficulty crossing the bridges, especially, of course, impossible by car. I'm going to try and bicycle into Manhattan. Thick gray clouds of smoke where the World Trade Centers used to be. Frustration over obtaining reports on casualties. The hospitals have not been able to coordinate. The command and control center that the city operates, the emergency center within the World Trade Towers. We haven't had a statement yet from the mayor's office. Obviously, people who can walk to New York University Hospital, which is downtown, are not those most critically injured. There would have been tens of thousands of people in that building at 9 o'clock in the morning. However, the total collapse came slowly. So just no word on what is undoubtedly going to be a staggering number of casualties. And I think my plan after we talk will be to try to bicycle into the city to get more information.
Thank you, Jackie. Looking at a report from the Reuters news agency, Abdel Bari Atwan, who's a London-based editor of an Arab newspaper, says that Saudi dissident Osama bin Laden warned 3 weeks ago that he and his followers would carry out an unprecedented attack on U.S. interests for its support of Israel. Audrey Cronin lectures in counterterrorism at Georgetown University. Are you there?
Yes, hello.
This would seem to be, if it is in fact a terrorist attack, certainly unprecedented. Would describe it.
Yes, I would say that in terms of the potential number of casualties, this is an unprecedented attack in the United States. Very tragic and shocking as we watch it unfold.
It's the idea of chaos and confusion, which we have now. The idea that air traffic is over for the moment in the United States. The biggest and most important government buildings in Washington, D.C. have been evacuated. Trading on the stock exchange has been shut down. This is chaos.
No, I don't think it's chaos yet. In fact, I think by looking at it that way and feeling these emotions that we feel, we help to bring about just exactly what an attack like this is intended to engender, which is fear and panic among those who are watching. This is not chaos. We still have a government that is in power and in control. Some of the reports that I'm watching evolve have turned out to be incorrect. It is a very alarming and very disturbing event, but it is not chaos.
Where are they in control with government buildings being evacuated? The Congress, the White House, the State Department, the Pentagon, the Treasury Department?
I think government control has more to do with the people who are directing the government than it does the buildings in which it occurs. There are some secure spaces. The president, as far as we know, is not in danger. And I would simply say that it's not business as usual, undoubtedly, But to describe it as chaos is only to bring about the kinds of emotions and panic that the terrorists are trying to engender.
Dr. Alice Cronin lectures in counterterrorism at Georgetown University. NPR's Alex Chadwick joins me now.
Good morning, Bob. I've just come through downtown Washington, D.C., and it's true there is not a sense of panic in the streets, but there certainly are people jamming the sidewalks, trying to get out of downtown, trying to get home. The buildings are shut down. People seem calm. Perhaps that's because there are no apparent fires or explosions going off in the central part of town north of the White House. But certainly buildings are closing. Streets are blocked off. Quite suddenly, police tapes go up across streets. One, in fact, in front of our building here, because the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms is across the street. And you've been here in the studio, so you didn't hear this, but a little while ago they called for the evacuation of this building. I think that's happening all over the city. People are being asked to leave, and they're worried. They're concerned, of course.
NPR's Don Gagne, our White House correspondent, is now across the street from the White House. Don?
Right, Bob. I'm just beyond Lafayette Park. They had us all leave the White House grounds at 9:41 this morning. Initially, we were told just to wait in Lafayette Park, which is of course right across the front lawn of the White House, the front of the house. Then they moved us to the north end. Then they had us cross the street, and the perimeter has widened. And 8th Street, which runs parallel to Pennsylvania Avenue, again a block north of the White House, has now been blocked off with that yellow tape. The streets that are open around here, there's gridlock, and there's clearly a heightened sense of alert. But there's also right now just a lot of people kind of standing here looking, trying to get a sense of what's going on.
A report from Fort Worth, home of American Airlines. American Airlines says it lost 2 aircraft carrying 156 people. Whatever lost means, whether they were hijacked or they've disappeared. Of course, all air traffic has been grounded in the United States. Alex.
It was one of the planes that hit the World Trade Center. At least one is reported to have been an American Airlines plane. Perhaps that's what they're counting.
In case you're just joining us, this morning, shortly before 9 o'clock Eastern Time, a plane crashed into one of the towers of the World Trade Center in Lower Manhattan in New York City. Shortly after 9 o'clock Eastern Time this morning, a second plane crashed into the second tower of the World Trade Center. Reached in Florida, President Bush referred to these incidents as an apparent terrorist attack and a national tragedy. Then, an aircraft crashed into the Pentagon in Arlington, Virginia, just outside of Washington, about an hour after the attacks in New York City. Government buildings in Washington, including the Capitol, the White House, the Treasury Department, and the State Department, were evacuated, with officials citing a credible threat of a terrorist attack. The Federal Aviation Administration shut down all aircraft takeoffs nationwide, following reports that these planes that had crashed into the World Trade Center in New York were hijacked aircraft. Shortly after 10 a.m. Eastern Time, about an hour and a half ago, one of the World Trade Center towers in New York City collapsed. And American Airlines said that one of the planes that crashed into the Trade Center was American Airlines Flight 11, hijacked after takeoff from Boston en route to Los Angeles. That is a capsule of what we know now, and we will return to you with continuing coverage of today's tragic incidents. This is special coverage of tragic events that have occurred today in New York City and in Washington, D.C. Airplanes have hit the World Trade Center, both towers of the World Trade Center in New York City, and a third plane has crashed into the Pentagon in Arlington, Virginia. outside of Washington. NPR's Tom Jalton is there. Tom?
Yeah, Bob. Some new developments here since I spoke to you last. There had been several helicopters circling around the building. Clearly, they were concerned about yet another aircraft coming in. Most of those have now landed. Also, the firefighting activity has died off some. The firefighters have pulled back. The priority now has shifted to first aid, to trying to recover victims. Dozens of ambulances have arrived, and this is clearly the priority now, is to get in there and to help as many people as possible. The flames, there are still flames evident outside the building, and I think that's probably debris from the aircraft that crashed. But the fire does seem to have died down somewhat, and as I said, the firefighters have pulled back. Most of the activity now has to do with ambulances.
Do you know what happens in that particular part of the Pentagon? Do you know what offices those are?
Well, the crash, the attack, really affected the Pentagon from top to bottom. That means 6 floors, and I now understand that it destroyed the first 2 rings. There are 5 rings. The 3rd ring was very badly damaged, and then as you got in towards the courtyard, apparently it was less so. So we've got essentially 2 rings and 6 stories, dozens and dozens of offices, and a number of very high-ranking Navy officers were there, some 3 stars. In fact, the Chief of Naval Operations, Admiral Vernon Clark, had his office in that area, but I do understand that Admiral Clark himself is okay. But there were a number of other 3-star Navy officers who had offices in that area. Below the Navy, the Army and the Air Force also had offices in there. I just can't. We haven't had any word yet on casualties. As you can imagine, just total chaos here in terms of communication.
NPR's Tom Jalton at the Pentagon. Morning Edition commentator Craig Childs is in New York, where he has been talking to witnesses about events this morning. The World Trade Center towers collapsing following being hit by airplanes, both towers. Craig?
Yes.
What have you heard this morning?
Well, I've just been on the street, standing there, arrived probably a couple minutes after the planes hit, and listening to people's responses, and then seeing them as the buildings actually exploded, and just the sense of outrage and emotion that's showing up. One man passed me, just shouting, "We need to bomb them now," and "I need to kill somebody," and that combined with with another person next to me saying, "My sister didn't go to work this morning. If she had gone to work, she would have died."
Craig, pardon me, we're going to go to Greg Chappelli, who's director of the Somerset County Hospital in Pennsylvania. Mr. Chappelli?
Yes.
You've had a plane crash in your area this morning.
We've had a plane crash in a small rural area just north of Somerset. It was supposedly in a strip mine area. We have many strip mines in Somerset County. At this point, they are combing the area for what we hope are survivors. Details are still sketchy on it. It was near Shanksville, Pennsylvania, which is near another area called Indian Lake, which they tell me is where the plane actually went down at. Details at this point are very sketchy.
Now, obviously we're wondering if this crash has any connection to the other 3 plane crashes of this morning.
There's a lot of speculation, but we have no idea at this point whether the crash is connected at all.
This was a 747 jumbo jet.
Well, reports are that it's a 767 or 747. We're not exactly sure about that yet either. But the initial reports we have are 767. That, again, reports are still sketchy.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
NPR's Don Gagne is near the White House. Don?
Yes, Bob. We're waiting for information here. They have evacuated the White House along with just about every other government building today. The evacuation word came at 9:41 this morning. Everyone, staff, reporters, was moved out first into Lafayette Park, then across Lafayette Park, We have more and more police tape going up as they continue to widen the security perimeter around the White House. It is quiet here now, outside of the police tape. It's a pretty good crowd of people, a lot of reporters, some White House staff, and some people from the area who are just watching to see what's going on. We're not getting any information from the White House on what the president's plans are. He was, of course, in Florida this morning, reading to elementary school students. When he got word of this, he made just a brief statement that you've described as he took off, and he's in the air, but we don't know where he goes or what the White House, the administration's plans are from here.
Well, that was my next question. If the White House has been evacuated and they're worried about possible terrorist action, maybe they don't want him at the White House.
Exactly. I mean, there is clearly very high security here, and while they're not telling us what they have done or if they've even had any specific threats here, they have to be concerned about that, and they're not giving us any information as to what their plans are once he lands, even where or when he will land.
There are good communication facilities on Air Force One. They may want to keep him there. Do they still have the alternative White House in the Blue Ridge Mountains?
Well, that I'm not aware of. I haven't heard mention of that today, but they do have plans for attacks such as this, for situations such as this. But again, we're not hearing anything as to what they plan on doing and where he will go and how he will monitor the situation.
I suspect you won't either. Thank you.
Exactly. But it is still clearly a very, very live situation. There are still sirens here. Police are absolutely on high alert. Park police, with their white shirts, are standing just across the street from me. They have machine guns and the kind of weapons that we don't usually see these officers carrying, and everyone is just watching and waiting, and it's not clear how long we'll be in this sort of a situation.
NPR's Don Gagne near the White House. Peter Overby is on Capitol Hill. Peter?
Hi, Bob.
What do you know?
Well, there are a few senators who are still on the grounds here. The Capitol has been evacuated. The senators have told their staffs to go home. In fact, it's rather calm here. It's a stunned calm, a lot of police sirens in the background, but no real activity around here. The senators, don't know what to make of it the same way the rest of us don't. There's concern expressed about what happened in the intelligence community. People aren't pointing fingers by any means, but they are wondering, how could this have happened? Senator Hagel, Chuck Hagel of Nebraska, a Republican, one of the Senate's experts on military affairs, his take on it is this country has been changed forevermore. This is the second Pearl Harbor. It's that serious. And Senator Joseph Biden, Democrat from Delaware, chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee, kind of took the other tack. He said he's obviously concerned about this, but he says that he thinks it would be a serious mistake to fundamentally alter the way we do business as a nation because of what's happened today.
NPR's Peter Overby, thank you very much. Jackie Leiden still standing by in New York City?
Yes.
You're still in Brooklyn?
I am. I'm preparing to leave by bicycle to go into Manhattan because that is the only way to go. One wonders at even a feeling of something like this in your voice or heart because, all morning I have been able to see the smoke colors change over where the World Trade Center used to be. There is not a feeling of panic in New York City. There is not a feeling of civil chaos, but there certainly is a feeling of confusion and what to do next. The streets are all gridlocked. The bridges are closed to all the pedestrian or bicycle traffic. And the whereabouts of the mayor and the chief of police are at this moment uncertain. The Department of Health has done what it can to assure people that things are running smoothly, but the great irony here is that the command and control center, the emergency crisis center set up by the city of New York was in the World Trade Center. So although we've had a statement from Governor Pataki condemning this in terms of information here in the city, a communication crisis, mobile phones not working, anyone without cable television cannot get a television picture of what's happening. And so while New York City is not panicking, it certainly is in a state of confusion, Bob.
Martin Costi.
Bob, I'm monitoring news coming in from around the world and around the country as people react to these attacks. First of all, in Europe, as may be expected, transportation is becoming more chaotic as flights are canceled or rerouted, especially flights going to the United States, as has been reported all morning. General aviation has been grounded in the U.S. Incoming flights from Europe are being rerouted to Canada, but Canada is also closing its airports or shutting down its aviation, but it's accepting those incoming flights from overseas that were heading to the United States. There's this item coming out of Pakistan. The ambassador of the Taliban movement there has called a news conference for tonight, but it has not been said whether this has anything to do with the incidents this morning here in the United States. But there's substantial interest in what he may have to say. In Switzerland, Alan Greenspan, the chairman of the Federal Reserve, is overseas. The Federal Reserve is very secretive about his whereabouts for security reasons, but they say he is well protected. Markets are closed in the United States. SEC says it will reopen them when they say it is practical to reopen them, but for now no U.S. markets are open. However, some stock markets around the world have dropped sharply, probably in reaction to the incidents in the United States. Specifically, Israel and Poland have seen sharp stock market drops. Around the country, many landmarks are being closed or evacuated, such as the Sears Tower in Chicago, the John Hancock Building. Some federal buildings, but does not look like many, are closing around the country. In some border crossing areas, such as Detroit, security is being stepped up at the border, but the borders are still open. And of course, again overseas, Secretary of State Colin Powell is coming home he's cutting short a visit to the Andean region. He was visiting Peru and Colombia in support of the administration's policies there, and he will be cutting that short and heading home. So that's the reaction so far around the world.
NPR's Martin Costi, thank you very much. Barbara Bradley is at the FBI. Barbara?
Hi, Bob. I'm afraid I don't have a whole lot to tell you. A spokesman came out just a few minutes ago and gave us a very short statement. The first point is that they've dispatched investigative teams to each of the sites. The second is that their number one priority is the safety of the injured and wounded. They wouldn't say how many people they think are injured or wounded. And the third is just that they're cooperating with other agencies. So I'm afraid we don't have a whole lot of information here at the FBI. They've evacuated the Justice Department. We can't get in there. There are apparently a few people in the FBI. But we can't go in there to get any more information.
Barbara Bradley at the FBI, thank you. John McChesney is at the Pentagon. John?
I'm standing, Bob, right in front of the Pentagon where the aircraft hit. I've been drafted as a litter bearer. There are firefighters that have knocked a lot of the fire down, although flames are still pouring from some of the windows. And there are a bunch of volunteer teams here who are organized around litter bearing, and we're about to be drafted to go in and pick up injured, which there must be many given the size of the devastation here. There is about a 75-foot hole in the wall here where the wall has collapsed. And the fire looks to be pretty well knocked down at this point, although there's still a lot of smoke pouring from the building. We've been asked to pull back twice because of reports of incoming aircraft, which fortunately never materialized. That's about it from here right now.
Thank you, John. That's John McChesney at the Pentagon. NPR's John Burnett joins me now from Texas. John, where are you?
Hi, Bob. I'm in Austin. I'm monitoring the American Airlines headquarters in Fort Worth.
American Airlines said it lost 2 planes today.
That's right. They just released a statement briefly a few minutes ago, and they confirmed that it has lost 2 aircraft this morning. One was Flight 11, a Boeing 767 that was en route from Boston to Los Angeles with 81 passengers, 9 flight attendants and the 2 pilots, and also Flight 77, which was a Boeing 757 operating from Washington Dulles to Los Angeles. it had 58 passengers, 4 flight attendants, and 2 pilots. The chairman of CEO of American Airlines, Donald Carty, said, "We're horrified by these tragic events, and our thoughts and prayers go out to the families of all involved."
Now, when they say they've lost 2 aircraft, what are they saying?
Well, they're not saying anything else. They're literally not saying anything else, and that all information beyond that must come from the FBI. And so they're not saying who might have hijacked it. They're not saying whether those planes were those that went into the World Trade Center or the Pentagon. That's literally all we have right now.
Thank you, John. And just a note, United Airlines confirms that a flight from Newark, New Jersey to San Francisco crashed near Pittsburgh. That would have been the Somerset County crash we referred to earlier. Whether or not it's related to these other tragedies is unknown, but all aircraft flights in the United States have been suspended now. You did not have to go far in Washington, D.C. to get a sense of the confusion and fear that permeates the air here. Just outside of National Public Radio, on 6th and Massachusetts here in Washington, people were being herded away from a van parked in the middle of the street, and rumors about what was in that van were flying, and nearby government workers told to evacuate their buildings were trying to figure out how to leave the city.
I'm scared. I'm frightened, really. This is, it's horrible. I've never been in nothing like this before.
How'd you hear about it? When did you find out about it?
On news, on the TV at work. Someone was listening to the radio, then they went into the little conference room and turned on TV, and we saw the World Trade Center bomb. Next thing I know, they say a building behind the Capitol. Then they say the Pentagon, and oh my God, that's too close for comfort.
I think it's horrible. I think it's just awful. I think it's horrible. I think we have to pray and really pray for America. It's really bad. It's a bad situation. My heart goes out to those people in New York. It's just awful. I just can't imagine being in that building.
Did you ever think it was going to hit this close to home?
I never did.
Did you ever imagine it?
No. This is something you see on TV. You would never think that it would actually happen here. No.
These are government workers on the streets of Washington, D.C. this morning, and they were talking to NPR's Lynn Neary. Don Gagne, our White House correspondent, is near the White House. Don?
All of this happened, Bob, while the president was in Florida at an event promoting education reforms. He was actually reading to children when his chief of staff, Andrew Card, whispered into his ear the first word of the World Trade Center crashes. He made a brief statement. He is now, he's left Florida. He's in Air Force One, and we have received no other official word from anyone at the White House about his whereabouts, about exactly what is going on here at the White House. I can tell you that we were evacuated, all the press, all the staff, anybody who works in the White House, groundskeepers and the like, were all sent out off the grounds at 9:41 a.m., sent into First Lafayette Park, which is right across the street. And then Park Police urgently moved us off to H Street, which is a full block away across from the front of the White House. And this is where we stand right now. It is as quiet as it has been all morning. Streets are closed off around here. There was a bit of gridlock in this area as recently as 5 or 10 minutes ago, but it too has cleared off, no doubt because of streets that have been closed off, feeding into this area. But the Park Police are standing guard, some with machine guns. Here comes a black limousine of some kind right now with a siren pulling up, going through the police tape that's set up. And it goes past, was not the kind of car that we see dignitaries visiting the White House traveling in. Anyway, we wait. We have no word yet on what the president is doing, will do, where he will go, and that's the situation outside the White House.
Don Gagne, thank you very much. Tom Gelton is near the Pentagon. Tom?
Yeah, Bob. I'm outside the Pentagon, where an aircraft crashed directly into the side of the Pentagon about 2 hours ago. Still a lot of rescue activity going on here now, but clearly the threat of more attacks has receded, so the emphasis has shifted now to rescue. There's the Red Cross helicopter just landing in front of the Pentagon here now. A number of ambulances. I can see a couple of dozen ambulances here, but they're not able to get close enough. They're not able to get inside the building to actually rescue people. There's still flames from the. I can see flames in several of the windows at the Pentagon. So still have a major mess here.
NPR's Tom Jolton at the Pentagon. The building has been hit by a plane this morning. That is Tom's assignment. He covers the Pentagon for us. We're going to New York now to Jim Zaroli. Jim?
Hi. Well, New York City is a scene of utter chaos and confusion right now. It is just a tragic and very upsetting situation. The city is in full terrorism alert. Now, what that means is they basically shut down all of the bridges and tunnels leading into the city. They've evacuated the United Nations, the New York Stock Exchange. They have sealed off bridges. They have basically, Mayor Giuliani was interviewed a little while ago and is saying that he wants everybody below Canal Street, which is the whole southern part of Manhattan, to leave the area if they work or live there, to leave and not to go in there. He says he says it's not really clear yet how many lives have been lost, but he said, I have a sense it's a horrendous number of lives lost. So this is really just a very chaotic situation right now.
Jim, thank you. Don Gagne near the White House.
For information here, there is a security perimeter several blocks wide around each side of the White House. It was evacuated at 9:41 this morning. Everyone out. The president has left Florida, where he was spending the morning promoting education reforms. The sense is that this was all precautionary here at the White House as part of the larger threats around the country. We do not have any word to whether or not there was any kind of an immediate threat or anything on the White House, but the Park Police have the area cordoned off. There's yellow police tape everywhere. The police have machine guns and those kind of automatic weapons, the kind that we do not see them carry ever around here. And we wait for word on where the president is going and where we go from here.
NPR's White House correspondent Don Gagne near the White House. The White House itself has been evacuated this morning, as have many other government buildings, including the Pentagon, where a plane has crashed into the Pentagon today. And Tom Jolton is there. Tom?
Yeah, Bob, I do have one very minor piece of good news in this day when we're so desperate for anything, and that is that the section of the Pentagon that was hit this morning directly by an aircraft was a new section of the Pentagon. It had been recently renovated, and for that reason, a number of the offices were unoccupied. Clearly, the casualties would have been far greater. This is probably the one spot in the entire perimeter of the Pentagon that could be hit with relatively less loss of life than elsewhere. I talked to a number of Army officers, for example, this morning, who were just getting ready to move into that area, and several of the offices hadn't even been occupied yet. Still, I mean, there was going to be very significant casualties here, but it could have been worse.
Thank you, Tom. Laura Bush, the president's wife, was to testify on Capitol Hill today about education. Rebecca Pearl is in New York City with school children. Rebecca?
Yes.
Rebecca?
Yes, hello.
Go ahead.
Well, I was at my son's school just this morning, and things are very, very calm at the school. The teachers are just keeping the kids in the class, and really the kids don't know what's happening outside, except that every now and then a parent comes in and says they're going to take their kid. The parents, the Manhattan parents, are bringing their kids home, but many of the kids at our school are from the parents, they live in Brooklyn, and they cannot get home. So they're kind of hanging around frantically outside the school thinking, oh, what should we do? The school, like many schools, are prepared to stay open all night so that, you know, to accommodate the kids. And at our school, they're asking for sleeping bags and stuff because they know they're going to have about a third of the kids at that particular school really live in Brooklyn. It's sort of a magnet school, if you will. So it's calm, but people are wondering about what the night's going to bring. The teachers are up for it. They're just like, well, it's part of our job, and we're just going to be here all night. That's the way it is.
Rebecca Pearl in New York. It has been an extraordinary and tragic morning across the United States. At about 9 a.m. Eastern Time, 2 separate planes crashed into the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center in New York City. One of those planes is reported to have been hijacked, an American Airlines jet flying from Boston to Los Angeles. A short time later, the 2 towers of the World Trade Center collapsed. Casualties are streaming into New York City hospitals. The Federal Aviation Administration has stopped all air traffic over the country. No airplanes are flying, except for Air Force One, which is carrying President Bush from Florida to Washington. Washington, though, also is in turmoil. At about 10 o'clock Eastern Time, a plane crashed into the Pentagon. At roughly the same time, a plane believed to be a 757 crashed near Pittsburgh. While it's not clear yet whether the Pennsylvania crash was connected to these other events, officials are calling the tragic events in Washington and New York one of the most highly coordinated and heinous acts of terrorism in history. Many government buildings have been evacuated in Washington, and key sites and landmarks across the country, such as the Sears Tower in Chicago, have been shut down. Worldwide reaction has been swift. Britain's Prime Minister Tony Blair says the democracies of the world have to come together to fight the mass terrorism that is now the evil in our world today. Palestinian leader Yasser Arafat says he sends his condolences to President Bush and the American people. Earlier this morning, President Bush was in Sarasota, Florida, where he was promoting his education programs. He was to read to school children at an elementary school in Sarasota, and he made this statement. Ladies and gentlemen, this is a difficult moment for America. I unfortunately will be going back to Washington after my remarks. Secretary Rod Page and the Lieutenant Governor will take the podium and discuss education. I do want to thank the folks here at the Booker Elementary School for their hospitality. Today, we've had a national tragedy. 2 airplanes have crashed into the World Trade Center in an apparent terrorist attack on our country. I have spoken to the Vice President, to the Governor of New York, to the Director of the FBI, and I've ordered that the full resources of the federal government go to help the victims and their families and to conduct a full-scale investigation to hunt down and to find those folks who committed this act. Terrorism against our nation will not stand.